Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Silver Tears Tarot, and welcome to today's reading. So, this one's going to be about divine masculine messages. I noticed that they started coming out yesterday, and somewhere in there, we decided that that was what today was going to be. And then I think it got echoed in the extended. It just kind of kept coming out that we needed to do that. So we're going to do the divine masculine messages reading, and these are like self-destruct messages that, or what they wish would be messages they could give you, and then they would self-destruct so they wouldn't have to deal with the repercussions of having told you. It'll be a general reading for this collective as always. So if you find that it does resonate for you, think about subscribing and maybe taking a look at some of the videos that came before to see if there might be any good messages in there for you. On those, because they're all incredibly connected. So if you're finding connection with one, you may find useful information in other ones. So we're looking at divine masculine messages. We're going to start out by looking at the energy that is around that divine masculine. So we've got the Page of Arrows coming out in the reverse. And so there's some of that fear that we've seen. So if you saw yesterday's reading, you know that there's a lot of fear that's kind of causing your person to clam up, to keep their emotions to themselves. There's a lot of attraction, but also a lot of pushing away. And the pushing away, this Page of Arrows in the reverse, kind of, it's like them cutting off their nose to spite their face, or making too big of a reaction, an outsized reaction compared with the with what they're reacting to compared with the stimuli. It's really just kind of, oh, I dropped a couple. Let's see what I've got. Nothing fell face down there, but we do have the hooded man in the reverse. This is them not being able to kind of face themselves. This is somebody who has a hard time looking at themselves in the mirror, and really they just have a hard time kind of getting all of the feeling right about themselves. Then we have the Six of Stones, and we have the Balance card, which is like the Temperance card. All right, so there's a lot going on in them where they're trying to maintain, or they're trying to kind of pursue a type of balance that they feel like would make them feel whole, or make them a little bit more like they wouldn't feel like they're constantly having to compartmentalize something and then move into a different space, and that feels a little bit disruptive to them when they do that. So if you've got a person who is experiencing this fear and kind of doing this inconsistent behavior with you, there's a lot of them having to shift gears, and there's something about that that doesn't feel right to them, but they don't exactly know how to solve it, partially because of this fear, and partially because they aren't really willing to go in and get to really look into the situation within themselves as much as maybe would benefit them to do. But this Six of Stones says that they're kind of drawn to do that, and they're starting to understand that the Six of Stones comes out with the Balance card. Like, it feels like together those two are what is drawing them toward resolving some things within themselves, but they probably wouldn't term it that way quite at this point. So let's go ahead and get in a little bit deeper. So there's a need, they know there's a need to make some improvements and to feel a little bit better about themselves. Oh, let's see what has come out here. And I know this one felt like it needed to be brought out too. So that's the oldest one. This is like the equivalent of the Hierophant, and this is Two of Boons, which is like the daily balance. And so there's a matter of them kind of, in some ways, trying to walk some kind of high road, and knowing that they're having a hard time walking a high road. They're having a hard time doing something they feel like they're supposed to be doing, and that their guidance says they are supposed to do. So already I think we're starting to get into those messages that they would want you to be aware of, but wouldn't exactly know how to tell you, or wouldn't want to have to deal with the repercussions of having told you. Let's see what else wants to come out in their energy right now. So there is a bit of a tenuous energy right here. It's definitely not as outgoing and vulnerable as ultimately what they are capable of being. They're just not, oh, okay, that one turned itself right back over. Just not feeling like they are what they're capable of being. And sometimes they are able to be more vulnerable with you. In some cases, they recently have been, or they perceive themselves to recently have been. We have the Seeker of Spells and the Four of Spells in reverse. So spells are fire energy. With this, there's a strong sense of that desire that kind of draws you guys closer. So we saw this in yesterday's reading, and there was a lot of that flame that refuses to go out, and sometimes gets bigger and when they're not expecting it to. Four of Spells in the reverse, though, that's more associated with their fear and more associated with things not necessarily not going according to plan. And so the worry that they have, though, with the Seven of Boons here, it really shows up with the Seven of Boons, is that they haven't truly invested in themselves. They haven't done what they needed to in order to have this plan. Reminds me a little bit of like the Three of Spells energy. So it would be like Three of Wands energy. Have you set things into motion? And with this Seven of Boons, that's earth energy, and them feeling like they haven't done what needs to be done. They haven't set things into place that need to be set into place in order for them to be able to enact whatever plan this is. So they kind of feel like their plans are being disrupted, but they don't have a solid enough foundation of work that they've done to move them in the right direction. This is compounded by that feeling of not being good enough and that feeling of essentially leaving yourself out in the cold, and it's that we often see it as a reference to the big three. So that's going to be that fear of rejection, of abandonment, of betrayal. But it's something that only they can let themselves in from. There's a place here for them to go on this card, and they're not going there. And but you still have the option. You have the key. You have the ability to let yourself in, and your person has the ability to let themselves in. The fire, the desire to do so, here we have the Weaver of Spells is there, but unfortunately, one of the feelings that kind of comes out with the Seeker of Spells is an inconsistency in this energy. Little bit of an inconsistency, little bit of a falling back on this fear that sounds like the Page of Arrows, which is kind of like the Fool in reverse a little bit. I mean, it's Page of Arrows, so it's Page of Swords in reverse, but it feels like not wanting to jump into something new. We have the Nine of Spells here. This one feels like something that could, and I hesitate to use the term good or bad, but it has the ability to really kind of shift things around. So with the Nine of Spells, this is about, and we've seen this coming up, I think we saw it coming up yesterday, something about when you get to a place where maybe you have set some boundaries, you have to make the decision about whether those boundaries are in the right place or whether they need to be moved, because it may mean that you've been guarding a wall you no longer need to guard, and you basically have some resistance that doesn't need to be there, basically. And so this is an opportunity for your person to determine that, hey, I no longer need to guard these walls. Maybe I'm coming up against a boundary that I need to shift a little bit, and because I've shifted this boundary to a healthier place, I no longer feel like I've got walls that need to be guarded, And so that's a little bit like what's happening in here. So that's why I'm saying it feels like it could be good or bad, because it has everything to do with what they decide to do when presented with the opportunity with which they'll be presented. Okay, here's that Fool in reverse I was feeling before. It's the White Heart, which is, that's the card that is the equivalent of the Fool in the traditional tarot. It's trying something new, but it's very much uncharted territory. Here in the reverse, though, it says they don't want to move into uncharted territory, which honestly does feel a lot like this Page of Arrows that we have in the reverse over here. But we've got the Two of Visions. So the Two of Visions talks about it being a partnership, talks about this being a feeling of partnership with you, even though it's not necessarily sure what the next step is going to be. There's unfinished business in this partnership. That's one of the things that I can feel from that. So there's a feeling of that bond that sometimes when the Lover's card comes out, you get that sense of a bond. This person feels a bond with you. And once again, I'm inclined to say that, with you they got in on the ground floor and vice versa. There's this feeling of this bond kind of underlying everything and the partnership underlying everything. So if you are feeling like this is, in some cases, there's a bond that the two of you have that helps you to do some learning that you wouldn't really be able to do if it wasn't for the fact that you hold each other to it. There's a strong sense of this partnership enabling you in a lot of ways, but it also it's a lot of responsibility, and it's a lot of weight. Um, let's take a look at let's take a look at the messages themselves. So we see that the messages have already started to come out here, but let's get in a little bit more deeply on those messages. Um, and kind of see what else wants to come out, because we see that there's a lot of pulling them back and forth here. We've got the Nine of Arrows. Now, sometimes they are incredibly sure of what it is they want. That is something that comes out of here in no uncertain terms. There are times when, even though they've got all this uncertainty, there's some things they are not in any way uncertain about. You make them incredibly happy. So I dropped these. I'm sorry if it got a little bit quiet there. I was kind of, I try to take a break in between things that I'm saying so that I can reach down and pick things up when I drop them, which I do, you know, somewhat frequently. But I was still wanting to talk to you. But anyway, so you make them so happy. They wish they could tell you the extent to which you make them happy. Because it's so much they can't say those words without feeling like they are out of line in some way, something that does not fit their values, something that feels like they're telling you too much. We have the Eight of Arrows and the Nine of Arrows, both of which are coming out in the reverse. But what both of them feel like to me is that they come and they go, and that there are these moments of clarity where they have no confusion, where they are completely not concerned and ready to move forward. And then they quickly are wrapped up in their fears once they start to do a little bit of thinking, but it's driven by that sun feeling. And here we have the Weaver of Visions. That's love. And it's the kind of love you bring out something in them that reminds them of what that warmest love that they could ever imagine would feel like. And it brings them an awareness of how much self-love that they have or do not have. And that can be somewhat uncomfortable. That can be part of what starts to trigger the move backwards after they've gotten to a place where they don't have the confusion. They're like, listen, I know exactly what I want. I want to move toward what makes me happy. And then I start to think about it and I realize I'm not really ready for that. I don't love myself enough. I'm not. And here's the thing. Again, they're not necessarily just going to be able to articulate that. With the Nine of Boons, you are part of what holds them up. So we've seen in a lot of previous readings that it's this sense of happiness, but it's what they perceive you to be. They perceive you to be very strong and very capable for them. You're part of what holds them up, even if they spend some time, you know, telling you that they are the strongest, or that they, so it really kind of depends on the dynamic that's been happening between some of you. But there's a little bit of this kind of, in several cases, almost a narcissistic sort of element that has come out. And it's not necessarily that these people that you're dealing with are narcissists, because it's entirely possible that somebody is not a diagnosable narcissist and still has some narcissistic tendencies. And of course, I am not in the business of diagnosing anyone with anything. And so I wouldn't say that. But what I would say is that there's some energy in there that has a little bit of that. And it's got this feeling of putting themselves out there to look very strong and to hide something that is indicative of maybe where they don't feel so strong. This Nine of Boons, though, has them utilizing some of that energy to hold themselves up, but they feel like it comes from you. So with this Ace of Challenges, though, this is kind of part of what's keeping them down. Ace of Challenges in reverse is all about not looking at some truth within themselves that they are aware of. So we've seen this before. We've seen evidence of this one in the past. But it's truth that they've been presented with, but for one reason or another is kind of not really in, they're not able to utilize it just yet, or they're kind of able to look past it and kind of, it doesn't end up being part of their decision-making process quite as much. So with the forested, ooh, okay, so the forest lord in the reverse, this is the equivalent of that emperor energy, and it's in the reverse. It's coming out here with the devil. So there's something that they feel like they need to feel protected when they're having conversations with you, when they're talking with you. They want to come across a certain way. And this is part of why they would not want to give you these messages, even if they could articulate them, because it feels like it implies weakness, and that's not what they want to do. They feel like they want control over something, which they don't really want. They wouldn't want it phrased that way, and yet that's exactly how it ends up feeling. So it's got a little bit of an element of a challenge to it, a little bit of an element of something that holds them, controls them, and keeps them down. And it's like they want your help with it, because you seem to burn away some of these lies they tell themselves, or make the truths a little bit more accessible and a little bit less scary because of the light that you're shining. But as soon as you're not there, they start to feel like they need to run away, and they need to get to a place where they can't do any further damage. That seems to come out. Those words want to come out. You also have the child of spells here, which is that sense of what happens when the light no longer shines, or they, for whatever reason, cut themselves off from it. Because it's not so much that you're not still shining the light, as they are, for some reason, turning into themselves and no longer absorbing any of it. And so they might still utilize you for some of your strength, but they're not really able to access that happiness that comes from that light. So here they begin to kind of retract into themselves, and then it becomes more of a self-fulfilling prophecy. They wish they could tell you that. They wish they could tell you what that roller coaster looks like that they go on. So it is very much a cycle. It is very much up and down, and what they experience when not in your in your presence is a pretty significant change. So we've got the Keeper of Challenges in the reverse, and then we've got the Seven of Visions in the reverse. They know they need to make a change from what they're doing right now, and they need to take one of these paths that is laid out in front of them, but they don't know which one, and they don't know how. And they wish and we've seen this before, they're wishing that they could just kind of get you to stay put and not continue making a bunch of changes in their absence. But it's like they're wanting to keep you in a holding pattern, and the problem with that is, if you stay put, you won't make the changes you need to make. So it's a matter of both of you having some adjustments that you're in the process of doing. They are wishing that you would be able to stay kind of in a holding pattern and almost just be able to put the whole thing on ice, so that they wouldn't be doing further damage to it by continuing to be quiet, continuing to be uncommunicative, whatever form that is taking. They're aware it is not helping as the time ticks by. So we've got this is basically the same exact feeling that I was just saying. This is the Council of Animals. It's the Judgment card in the traditional tarot. And so when it came out, it kind of, you may have seen it turn itself over, and I'm like, I see that, and I recognize that it's not just that it comes out in the reverse, but that it goes to the reverse. So there's something about this that has shifted in the way that they see it in the time that they've been looking at this. So it has gone from being something where they felt incredibly self-righteous, partially about this misunderstanding that we've been hearing a little bit more about here in the last few days. Partially it's around that misunderstanding, but partially it's around the fact that they just feel like they didn't handle things properly. There's been a lot of learning. So with the Child of Boons, this is the card of the student. It is also the card of feeling open to that learning. Now, when they've got that Nine of Arrows and that Eight of Arrows in the reverse, that's when they're feeling most open to this learning. But it's one of those things that, just like the way they behave with you, it kind of comes and it goes. And they wish they could tell you that too. I'm curious to know what they would tell you about their feelings about the situation, and just kind of what some of the, well, when we get into the extended, we'll look into some additional messages, but I'm curious to see like their take on that, because we got into their emotions a little bit yesterday in the extended, because they didn't come out as much in the in the YouTube reading itself. And so sometimes when something I know I want to see a little bit more of it, I'll just kind of go in and ask the question a little bit more directly when we get into the extended. So that's what we did yesterday. And that was part of what made me think, okay, clearly we have to do a Divine Masculine Messages, because they're making changes, they're making progress. They wish they could tell you, but they don't feel like they can, because they're not in a place where they can quite be that vulnerable yet. So we also have the Huntsman. With this energy, though, it's a matter of having made some, they've become aware, they've learned some things about themselves, or it's in the process of learning some things about themselves. So they're not quite there with the new perspective that they're going to need and that they're going to have. So we don't quite see the Hanged Man energy just yet, but I think we're getting a little bit closer to it. That is going to be actually kind of significant, I feel like, when it happens, because it's like they put together a few things. So they feel like they've made some real adjustments and that they've learned. And I won't say that they haven't, but when we look at like the Child of Spells, I think what we see is a lot of them still undermining themselves, a lot of them still doing some self-destructive behaviors. And honestly, that's the first thing that wanted to come out when I saw that Ace of Challenges in reverse. It's the ways that they're lying to themselves, or the ways that they're not allowing themselves to operate in truth, that create some of that self-destructive type behavior. So we're going to go on to look into what you need to do as a result of everything that we see here. But I think when we go into the extended, we're going to go and ask for some additional messages. But in particular, we're going to lead with what is it that they're feeling about the situation, that they could tell you about it. Because at this point, it's kind of like a, hey, I'm in an unsteady place. I still feel this bond. I'm still very much using that energy. You make me incredibly happy, and I'm riding those coattails. I'm continuing to do that. But there's a lot of them kind of, they clam up. They're unable to communicate at a certain point. So that's something that becomes kind of important in there. And it's like they wish they could tell you, but they also don't want to, because they're not ready to be that kind of vulnerable, and they're not ready to, they can't make the message self-destruct once they've given it to you. So, yeah, let's take a look at your area of focus, given what else is out here on the table, before we get into do that extended. These extendeds have been kind of intense lately, I'll say. They just kind of, and they're supposed to be like a part 2. They're supposed to be an extended, but it seems like sometimes the next day it ends up being like an extended to that extended is very much just kind of continuing. So here we've got the Guardian in reverse, and the Guardian in this deck is a little bit it's not necessarily a particularly permissive guardian. Okay, so here with it being in the reverse, it's got that sense of having gotten out from under the thumb of something that's controlling you, and you're encouraged to keep out, like stay out of it. You've got something you're in the middle of working on with the 10 of Arrows, and you want to continue on that path. You've got a lot of continue kind of energy. 4 of Arrows in reverse. Here's why. So there is the healing that's not yet done. Here recently, or you may still be in the process of it, there's been some indication of kind of where your healing has left off. How far along that healing path have you made it, and maybe how far do you still have to go? So as you've been looking at that, and you've kind of seen the outlines of the healing really laid out for you and shown to you, that gives you some idea with, in particular, ancient pain, that sort of pain that's always in the background, that can't be resolved by anybody but you, and has to be resolved very fully. Otherwise, there's always going to be something in there that you kind of have to go back in after. And in fact, that's kind of what I find that most of you are doing, is kind of going back in after something that you've already partially resolved. But you've removed a fairly sizable chunk here recently, which is why we see that Guardian in the reverse. So you're encouraged to celebrate that, but also be aware you may be a little bit surprised at what you're capable of. So you've got the Weaver of Challenges here. This is the ability to sit in an uncomfortable situation. And that's a lesson that we've seen from many angles since I started coming out here on YouTube. But this is a situation where all of a sudden, You don't feel pressed to make a quick decision or a rash decision because you realize there's not really any need to do so, and you're able to kind of just be more comfortable, even though you know a decision hasn't been made and there are some loose ends out there. You've become better at operating with a few loose ends out there. We also have the Lovers card in the upright, which says what it feels like to me is that the way that you handle a partnership going forward looks pretty different from what you will have done with a partnership in the past. And it has everything to do with the progress that you've made here and the progress that you continue to make. It's not lessened by the fact that you still have healing left to do. In fact, it's helped by the fact that you have some idea of what that is. With the Keeper of Visions, this is your ability to be charismatic and um, to really make people comfortable in a situation. But the thing you've got to be careful of is it also is the thing that you may, depending on how much ego you mix in, and I'm trying to figure out how best to say it because I can feel it, but I'm not sure how to make it real clear. Depending on how much ego comes out and how much you mix with that charisma, you could also say, I want to present things a certain way, and it creates a potential for great emotional limitation. So just something to be aware of. Don't get yourself too wrapped up in identifying a certain way with regard to the way that you are perceived. So I am always unflappable, or I am always a problem solver, or whatever it is that you might be thinking or might be feeling like you would want to be the go-to or whatever it is. It's wise not to get too wrapped up in the concept, because that is an egoistic concept that leads to not having as much emotional range. Essentially, that's what comes out with that. We also have the Two of Spells here. So Two of Spells is about coming to a decision point or a crossroads and having to pick a direction, pick something that you're going to do or that you're going to actively not do, and kind of go from there. That's kind of what's happening in the Two of Spells energy. So you're going to be asked to get a little bit more, a little bit deeper into yourself and into the way that you perceive things. I feel like you're going to end up thinking about this a little bit more. You're going to end up thinking about the way you approach a great many things because of whatever has been unlocked up here. It turns out that's pretty far upstream, and it has some impact on you. Three of Visions says that you've got this social thing coming up, but you need to consider whether you want to use the energy by going to the social event, or whether you want to spare that energy and utilize it to kind of go within yourself. You've gotten the message a couple of times that that's going to be something that's valuable to you at some point. You'll be able to see pretty clearly at the time which one this is, and it'll be something where you know you're not going to regret it afterwards. Four of Boons in the reverse. So this is you letting go of something that you're going to recognize. It feels a little bit like that Nine of Wands, that Nine of Spells over here, where you come to a crossroads, or your person comes to a crossroads. So this is something that's been happening with you also. You come to a crossroads and you have to decide, am I going to continue to guard this, or do I simply adjust a boundary, and that kind of changes things. With this Four of Boons, this is where you decide to adjust some boundaries, or just decide that something is no longer super important to you, and you come to the end of a cycle. So this is there's a sense of relief in coming to the end of this particular cycle. So we've got the Wide World, which is like the equivalent of the World card. Now, I'm not suggesting that you are finishing up all cycles or you're wrapping up everything that's ever mattered to you, but I will say that this is a cycle that enables you to open yourself up so that you are refreshed as you go on the next leg of this journey, and just in time for the new year. Definitely let's keep an eye on this energy, because it feels like you're wrapping something up so that you can jump into something that's maybe a little bit more challenging, but not necessarily as emotionally demanding, but just as emotionally fulfilling. So you've got the Keeper of Spells here, which says that you've lost none of the ability to get things done, or to make things happen, or to feel the excitement from doing so. So this is something that even if you're kind of feeling a little bit down, it's all still there and it's going to come back. So that's very temporary if you're not feeling like you're up to it. Part of what's going to be what's going to be your success is not looking at things the way that you've always looked at them in the past. So with the Six of Visions, this really has you not so much ignoring the past or forgetting the past, but thinking about things and using your newfound lessons in a different way. So we're gonna go into the extended now, which if you want to go to that, the link is down below in the description for the video. Um, but when we get there, we're going to look into kind of what's happening with these messages, particularly as like, what would they tell you about how they feel about the situation or how they feel about you? At this point, it's like, I wish I could get you to stay in some sort of holding pattern. Let's get a little bit deeper into that and just kind of see what that really means. So that's what we'll do when we get into the extended. I will either see you there or I look forward to seeing you again in tomorrow's reading.